Back this week, we're going to try to make this a regular thing, talking about AI, digital business transformation, user experience, and just keep the topics going. This week, you wanted to come in with a specific topic around critical thinking in the age of AI and AI tools. You had an intro. Kick us off. Tell us what we're going to talk about.
Sure thing. So I think this is the perfect time to be talking about this, as we are currently here in Dubai, deep in the middle of Ramadan, which is a period of reflection around self-discipline, around engaging with people. So I think it's a great time to be talking about critical thinking. And there's a book I've been reading recently. It's not a particularly new book. It's an old book from about 2011 by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, which has really sort of brought me back. I've read it a while ago, but it brought me back to thinking about things this week, as there's been a lot of commentary on social at the moment around how we're changing our abilities to think at the moment. So the idea of thinking fast and slow is around two systems of thinking. There's system one, which is sort of your automatic brain responses. So when you tie your shoelaces, you don't really think about it. Or there's system two, which is your deep thought processes. And there is a lot of thought and a lot of suggestion at the moment that as we use AI, we're starting to gravitate more towards system one thinking and starting to use less of our system two processes. So we start to focus less, we start to think less about what we're doing, and we delegate this ability to AI. I've also seen some recent evidence that actually we're not getting smarter anymore. We're starting to see declines in numeracy and literacy as time goes on. And I don't think AI has necessarily the best ability to support us in this unless we're very careful about how we use it.
Do you think that's caused from the fact that AI can play all these different roles, right? We hear it as a coach, whether it's a teacher, a therapist, but most of the time, and especially in business, where we tend to hear about it is efficiency gains and crank out more for less. And it feels like of all the things that you could do, that's the area of focus that we tend to see a lot. And I'm curious how you view that.
I think you're spot on. I think this comes back to what we were saying in our last chat, which was around the idea that a lot of businesses at the moment are focusing on bottom line improvement around operational efficiency. As you say, how can we do it quicker? How can we be more efficient to get the same result? The danger is the result isn't always the same. It might look the same. And I think particularly when we're talking about large language models, there is a tendency that we can get a quick answer out which looks good on the surface, but it doesn't necessarily add the value of a craftsman. And I think what we need to appreciate with large language models at the moment is that deep reasoning is not there. It's a statistical prediction model which guesses at the right word it's going to show you next, but you don't have that time taken to think about what you're doing, to think about the implications and the wider connections with the answer. And I think there's the danger. If we start to assume that what we've got looks good, but without that, we get this sort of automatic response, which ticks the box, but does it really move the needle?
Well, let me throw something back at you as sort of a provocation. Previously, we've talked how what AI gets you is an aggregation of knowledge. And based on that, it then presents you something that, as you mentioned, is like the most probabilistic outcome that you could want. And yes, you can adjust temperature and sort of do your RAG layers and your context layers. In general, when you look at innovation and you look at new ideas, it comes from this sort of like lateral thinking leap, or it comes from, and dare I say it, actually having time to think. Right? That you actually have time to reflect, you have time to sort of digest information, and then you can spit that back out. And with AI, you're just getting this like nonstop, like efficient, like crank more out, do more. And it seems like almost nobody's looking at that idea of how am I using this as, well, not nobody, but how am I using this as a creative partner versus just dragging this out? And I guess the question that I would have back to you is, with the decline, or not decline, but maybe the perception that we can do things quicker, that you have this natural decline of ability to ingest information and really think deeply and make these lateral connections, like what starts to get missing there? Like where do we fall down and fail on that?
Yeah. Do you know what? I think we don't help ourselves either. Before I unpack that, I think we are in an age now where we're very used to training our brains subconsciously to think a certain way. If you look at nearly all examples of digital marketing at the moment, you look at how we consume a lot of content and how we're engaging with the world, it's changed dramatically over the last 20 years. I saw an interesting GIF the other day where it was showing how much time is spent online versus friends versus engaging with community versus everything else. And as you'd imagine, the line showing the online engagement has grown dramatically and everything else has shrunk. So we live online these days. There is an argument to say that actually we do some of these things like engaging with friends online now rather than necessarily in person. We don't go down the pub, but we might join a Skype chat or a Zoom chat to talk with our friends, because we're particularly as digital people, we're a bit more distributed in the world. But I think the reality is we consume a lot of our world through a screen. And my concern is that we get used to doing that. So when we start to scroll through social media, we're consuming content which is very short, which is designed to be immediately emotional, immediately humorous, immediately engaging, but it's very fire and forget. You consume one, it's 30 seconds long, you move on to the next one, repeatedly over and over again. So we build up this inability to focus. And I found it myself. I find it easier to watch shorter programs on Amazon than I do watch movies these days. And that's simply an example of how I've trained my brain to focus.
Do you watch series or movies? I mean, when you do that, because like I found that I can watch movies easier than series because it's a time commitment for me, like a total time span commitment. But I get what you're saying with series can be a shorter, like a 30 or 40 minute.
Yeah, I don't binge stuff much, a bit, but not. I wouldn't watch a whole series in one go. I typically watch one or two episodes. I can watch a movie, but I do find my attention wavering partway through, and sometimes I'll multitask and do other things while I'm watching a movie. There's a great fallacy or a misunderstanding around multitasking. I think there's a bit of bragging rights around people thinking, I can multitask really well, I can do two things at once. And we know, I think all of us accept now, that our performance drops when we multitask because task switching is extremely cognitively expensive for us to do. So we can do it, but we're not good at it.
I'm going to give you a couple things and you tell me where you want to dig in on this, because there's two great books, one called Stolen Focus. The second is The Anxious Generation. Literally both of those books on what you just talked about, whereas we're, consuming shorter and shorter content, and it's making us more and more anxious. It's not allowing us to focus. So there's that part where we could go down, and how AI tools are just exacerbating that.
Yeah, they are.
The second thing is I was super, super lucky when I started at my new job that I got a couple different career coaches, and I loved their coaching style. And so I said, how did you learn this? And they went to programs for it and learned these skills. And so I got the bibliography for one of the programs, and I've been working my way through the books. And almost every book talks about how critical it is to save half your day or whatever you can for long-term thinking, to just
100%.
do it. And so we could take it in either way. We could take it in a different direction. But I think that's interesting because I do consume and I do multitask so much. But if I didn't have those coaches to help me, I don't think I would recognize how much I need that just time to think that you don't get and that is being eroded from our lives. And I don't know. There's so many ways we could go about this. It hit me back. What do you think?
So you made me think of something a very smart boss once said to me about making time for strategy, making time for your vision. You either do it over breakfast or in the evening or on the toilet, whatever you're doing, you need to make time to think about what you're doing, because it's very easy in this world to just react to people. His name's Brendan Tansey. I used to work for him when I was at WPP. But that stuck with me for a long time. And I actually think you need to go further than that. As to you're saying, carve out half your day. I quite like that because the value is in our thought. I think let's pick on the AI aspect because I think that it's very relevant at the moment. But with various social media and how we're marketed at the moment, and even how TV programming is done at the moment, we're starting to skew much more towards this system one thinking of short focus, short emotional responses to things. And there's a real danger in that. And where I completely agree with what you're saying about AI exacerbating it, because it's about quick answers. It's about, give me a prompt. My prompt might be 2 or 3 sentences. Give me the answer. I don't want to work for it. Just give me the answer. And we've got to start being conscious that that's what we're doing, that we're encouraging our system 1 brain when we need to engage our system 2 brain. There's some ways we can do that, I think. We've got to also understand why we're doing it. And it's really simple. Humans are lazy. Humans don't like working hard. If you can give me the answer in 1 step rather than 10 steps, I'll take the 1 step.
That was the whole convenience is greater than that we talked about last time. It's like, make something convenient for me. I will take a less than experience just because, as you said, I'm lazy. That can be good though, right? Because like lazy, the whole thing is like, how do I make something easier and complete that task easier? Versus sometimes, I don't know, you get people at work who just sort of like create churn to do things. But so go back to that. Like, when we get into a situation where so much perceived value is derived from speedy output, but you, myself, and I would say any good strategic thinker knows that great output can be derived from what looks like very minimal type of output. And so I'll say in a week, I could produce 100 things very quickly, right? With AI, it makes it even better. Like I can create 1,000 things, or I create 1 thing. And with AI, I feel like we get confused with this idea that quantity is now back in style over quality. And I do have an idea of how to solve that on the experience side, but if you want to, so I don't usurp and monologue too much, like, what do you think on that?
You just reminded me of a great anecdote, and I can't remember where I've stolen this from, but there's a story that like 100 years ago, Henry Ford had a problem with some machinery in his factory, and he couldn't get it working properly. It wasn't working very efficiently, so he hired an engineer from General Electric to come and look at it. And the guy came in and spent a short amount of time looking over it. In the end, drew a chalk mark cross on it and told people to cut it apart there and rebuild it. And then it worked perfectly. Sent him the invoice for it. And he came back saying it was an incredible amount of money. It's like, you were only actually in the factory for an hour. I was like, why are you charging me tens of thousands of dollars for this back then, which was a lot of money? The response came back was, I've spent however many thousands of hours building my expertise to get to this point. The hour I spent was just what I needed to do.
So I always heard that as an anecdote. That was like the old repairman comes into the steamship and like looks over it and like takes a hammer and dink. Then here's your bill for 100,000. Like what? Like you spent? I think there is something to that. Both of us have worked in consulting in the past, which I think then becomes a difficult one because everything is done by hour, not by value per se, right? And I don't want to get into that discussion. I think it's just worth checking that box that we're aware of that.
But I think you're hitting the nail on the head with it, because the point is it's very easy to masquerade as those thousands of hours of experience. Through something like AI. You can produce an answer which looks good, but actually does it move the needle? So I like the idea of focusing on value generation. I like the idea of benchmarking, of setting expectations around, I'm going to do this for you. This is what I expect to get as a result. Measure me against that. I think that's a great way to do business.
Now I'm going to go off on my monologue, because now you said something about, sort of AI creating something that looks of value versus what is value. And in the past, I don't know, several months, since everything has been popping up so much around experience with AI tools, and you have user interface generation machines, all of this, Claude and ChatGPT, there is this constant thing of like, designers are going to get replaced, or we're going to get out of a job. And here's my whole thing. It's like, if you think that's our job, to just make sites, then great, we are going to be displaced. Every sort of leap in technology, and I think this is what I've come to in the last few weeks of thinking about this. Every leap in technology is this ability to abstract what compute is doing to make it easier to use for the masses, right? So I go back 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, punch cards, command line, hard to use. Right? Okay, now we get a desktop. We get a metaphor that I can use. Okay, it starts to get easier. More people can use it. It democratizes it. You start to get mobile phones. Everybody can now have everything with them at all times. And each one of those times you hear like, oh, this is gonna, completely destroy the landscape of whatever industry. In our case, in my case, that is user experience. And what I've come to the conclusion of is, no, it's not. That's a stupid argument. Let's stop talking like that. What it does, what AI will do in terms of all the tools that you have, is it's going to continue to democratize everything, right? So great designers, like the top 5% of the pyramid, are still going to have good jobs. And you're going to have 95% of the pyramid that are what I call Squarespace designers. But marketing has had this, and business has had this, and so many people have had this of any industry. It's not unique to anything that we do. And it's the ability to express what actual value is. And this is where I get sort of pissed at designers, right? Like really good ones, because somebody will say, I need a website, right? And here comes your Squarespace designer. I got my AI tools. I can do this for you in 1 week, right? And you're going to get this website. Oh, one week. That sounds great. I'm only going to charge you $500 for it. Oh, even better, right? And then here comes, sort of the design thinking machine, the high-end designers. It's like, oh, you want a website for your coffee. Are you really selling coffee, or are you selling ethics and morals and fair trade? And how are people going to view this site and see what is the environment they're going to be? And it's like all of a sudden this person is I just wanted a website to sell my instant coffee on, right? Like Squarespace dude's going to give it to me for 500. And you just put a quote in front of me for 50,000. Yes, but we're going to give you this experience. And it's like, oh God damn it, just like read the room a little bit. Yeah. So this is my whole problem, and this is where I feel it's like critical for good designers, or like really the top end of designers, to understand how people see value and articulate what we do in the terms of other people. And this is why it frustrates me, because designers will always be think about the user, and then we come and give our perspective so much. It drives me nuts. I told you I was going to monologue. I'm not done yet. It's like a frustration point, but just read the room and understand what you need to do, what your job is, and how you're describing that value. But what we do is not going to go away in the face of AI. It's just more people are going to party at the lower end of the pool, and that's absolutely fine. But at the high end, know how to express that value. And sorry I went off on that, but I wanted to get that. Like, I'd been thinking about on the walk to the studio today, so I was like, let me nail that.
It's a great argument. And one of the things we miss in this is that this industry tends to go through cycles, that when you've got the ability to churn out relatively competent, valuable, useful, low-end output, everybody jumps on it, like Squarespace. Everybody can suddenly put together a website, even themselves. My wife's put together a Shopify website with no skills and hasn't hired anybody to. She's just done it. When everybody can do that, you suddenly get the bar being lifted. But to go back to your coffee example, if I want to sell coffee and online is my medium in which I'm going to do that, if 1,000 people are putting their Squarespace or Shopify sites up there to sell their coffee, it becomes then a point about how do I differentiate?
Yes.
And that's where the value of craft, where the value of experience design, and even the value of journey optimization becomes really important, because how do you lift yourself above that? How do you provide something which is better through online experience, forget the coffee for the moment, better through online experience than everybody else out there? And it becomes harder. So the craftsmen, actually their skills get even more in demand because there's so much challenge to what they're doing. But we're going through that cycle at the moment where AI is so abundant at the moment that everybody's engaging with that first stage. And we're starting to find that, good example is social media, starting to find that when everybody can write copy, you start to realize, well, what's the value in the crap that's being churned out? And you read, I made a point this week of saying I'm not going to follow and like anybody who's putting out just pure AI content, because it's really dull and it's really boring and it doesn't tell me anything.
Okay, so I'm gonna riff off that for a minute. This week I have finally started Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. right? Which is like a mammoth postmodern fiction book that I've been
So we're
wanting
going to
to
have to put
read.
a book list at the end of this because you mentioned a couple that I actually want to go and chase up.
Stealing Fire is another good one in terms of the thinking slow, working together. But with Gravity's Rainbow, one of the reasons that I commit to books like that, and I finally just finished Infinite Jest, Antkind, all these postmodern fiction books. What I love about that is it needed somebody to see the English language or language in a different way to tell a type of story and to write a type of sentence. I don't know how to say better, the grammatical prose that sounds so on a high horse, but the writing style is so unique and it can be difficult, but it is something that when I read things like this, the way that metaphors are used, it just like unlocks these parts of my brain that sort of are like, what would that look like if this text were design or an experience? How would you think about that? So for me, it's that lateral thinking piece. But like those are the things that I think are so interesting. And when you commit yourself to a book like Gravity's Rainbow, that's like 1,000 pages. You're there for a good 6 months hanging out on that book. But that goes back to the ability to focus, right? So I'm going to tie together a few things of what you said. You have this long form reading, which a lot of people don't even read one book a year.
I've stopped.
Right?
I don't read.
Yeah. Well,
Audiobooks for me.
I listened. Well, yes, when I say read, I mean audiobooks for the most
But
time.
it's a shift because I used to be a voracious reader, and over the last 10 years, I've completely stopped.
I mean, I do audiobooks because I travel a lot, so it makes it easier for me as opposed to bringing books with me. But so you have this commitment of time that you are giving, and then through that commitment of time, you're absorbing this information, and then you need to find the slow sort of thinking time to allow your brain to digest that information. And then you need to find, in my case, the lateral thinking time, which is like I take a morning walk to then, okay, I have absorbed information, I have internalized the information, and now I can apply it laterally to things. And if I take your opening comment, we are thinking short term. AI tools are not helping that. This is just, baseball bat to the head beating us down in these things. And you had a question earlier, which is like, if all businesses are thinking like this, and if this is what we get into like quarter by quarter, and it's going to get worse, right? Month by month and week by week, what do we do to get out of it? How do we work different? And I'll throw the question back to you. Give me your sort of thoughts on that.
I've got two angles on this. They're both quite interesting things to pick apart. So let's see where we go. The first one is to think about our personal ability to influence that. And I think we've got to be reasonable to accept the fact that certainly I do. I scroll through rubbish on my phone, and that's okay. You understand what you're doing, but
sometimes you need downtime, right? You do need just like, brain time to just relax.
You do, and it's okay to be entertained. No, completely. Yeah. But I think when you're coming to do something useful, and I don't know, I like to think that most of us in roles where we think we add a personal level of value. We're there to achieve something, to deliver something, to create something. I like to say that I'm going to tell my grandkids, that's what I did 10 years ago. That's what I did 20 years ago. I look back at my career and say, I achieved this, and I'm proud of it. So to be able to do that, it's got to be thoughtful, it's got to be considered, and it's got to be interesting. So we need to look at our tools as ways to achieve that. And I'm starting to retract back from, never mind AI being a replacement for parts of the workforce, I'm starting to come back from, is it even a co-pilot, a partner? And I don't think it is. I'm coming much more down to the idea, particularly with large language models, that generative AI is a tool. It's a tool to help my brain work. And it's my brain that's going to come up with the output and the interest and the value creation. It's not AI. If I use AI, it will be generic, it will be very dull, and it won't really achieve very much.
Are you going after the bicycle for the mind metaphor?
Yeah. But I think there's ways you can use it in a very smart way. So the tendency is, I've got this question, hey, ChatGPT, give me the answer. Tell me what I need to do in this situation. We need to stop doing that, because by doing that, we're detraining our brain's ability to think. And we need to use it instead to encourage our brains to move away from this system one thinking into this slow, considered system two thinking by saying, for example, to ChatGPT, tell me the important factors when I look at this question. Don't give me the answer. And in fact, if you're going to give me the answer, give me the counterpoints to it. Critique whatever you've done. And I do that quite a lot now. If I say, I've got this question, tell me what you think is an immediate response. And then my next prompt is, and now tell me why that's wrong. And tell me the things I need to look at. And then my third one is, I've got this weird other idea, which I don't think's that connected, but tell me how the two connect. And that makes you think. It makes you think across things.
That's the lateral thinking part. Yeah. So what you just said, do you think in the next decade that we're going to see more businesses pop up that are around like reclaiming your thinking? And I'll tell you why. There's in the past like 10 or 20 years, what I have seen come up, and I forget what this is called, where you do the 10-day meditation silent retreat. And it seems to be more and more popular coming up, especially in the tech world with these things. You see the retreats in Bali, you see the retreats in, Thailand and these types of things. And some of them to me are BS, but then some of them really have something there. And I had a friend in Netherlands that went and did one of these 10-day retreats. And I tend to think of him as like a stoic, just a very stoic, hardcore individual. I talked to him afterwards, and he was like, at day 3 or 4, he lost his shit.
Really?
He's like, I was crying. I wanted to scream at everybody. He's like, I couldn't stand it. I didn't think I could be there. And I kept saying to myself, just 5 minutes more, 10 minutes more. He's like, let me try to get over this. He said by day 6, everything just clicked for him. And by day 10, he didn't want to leave.
Oh, wow.
He was like this. And this was, again, someone I considered like this classic manly man, stoic individual, no emotions.
I'm so skeptical about this.
I am too, but he was like, everybody should do this at least once in their life.
Yeah, okay.
And if you read the book, another book, Creativity Inc., the Pixar one,
I know that one, yeah.
It talks about how they would do the 10-day retreat every year, right? Because it was just this moment to allow your brain time to settle and think and sort of resettle. I remember when I worked at Microsoft, Bill Gates had this thing called Think Week, where he would take papers from internal Microsoft, like people would write papers, and he would go into the woods for like a week or two, no connectivity, and just read and reflect. And I think there's something to it. And it's just like in the next decade, are we going to see so many more offline businesses come up for people who are trying to reclaim that slow process thinking?
Yeah, that sounds like a great initiative. I think the other thing we're in danger of losing is we go through this process of this fast thinking and immediate answers, particularly when we look at this operational efficiency drive, is we start to lose the sense of why junior team members are important. And we start to think, well, if I can get an LLM to do the work of a business analyst, a junior analyst, why do I need one? And I've heard people say this to me in the past. If I can get an AI to produce my copy for me, why do I need a copywriter? And aside from the quality of the output, the danger is that if we lose that entry-level craft, what we lose then is, in a couple of years' time, is that mid-level. And we end up with these people who are potentially trained on the pre-AI era, moving upwards through the chain of businesses, some of whom dropping out as it becomes more efficient to operate with smaller teams, and we end up with nothing to replace them. So the danger is we're running the risk of a real dearth of cognitive ability in, say, 5 to 10 years' time, where actually we've lost the ability to train the people who are coming through the system. There's a great theory by, I think it's Vygotsky, around social cultural theory, social learning theory, that actually we learn best through effectively what's called scaffolding, through teaching people how to learn their craft, and we learn best by receiving information in that way. At the very, very least, and I don't think it's a replacement, but at the very least, we need to start using these LLMs as a way to introduce our own scaffolding. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I've recently learned a couple of languages, Python and a couple of framework languages for coding, just to keep my eye in. But I use scaffolding for this. I use large language models for this to say, hey, help me how to do this step, but break it down for me. It's never just cut and paste code. It's, okay, I don't really understand what you've done there. Give it me in idiot terms, in 6 steps of what you're doing. And sometimes I go to the point of saying, line by line, explain for me what each piece does. So I'm building my knowledge, my ability to understand how I'm operating things. And then I can learn on top of that. We need to think about scaffolding within our businesses. And if we're reliant on AI being the thing that we're training, Well, where are we getting that lateral thinking from? Where are we getting that subjective experience from?
I mean, scaffolding is a well-worn topic, and I think for me it's just understanding what are the steps and the rules to get to an outcome, and that's how you learn, right? Like if A, if B, if C, then D, right? And I think what you're saying is this challenge that we're just getting to D, we don't get A, B, and C, and now we don't know, or if we do not remedy this, we won't know how we arrived at D. So I'm going to throw the last question to you. With businesses, we've been talking about sort of the drive for efficiency. You've talked about this separation of layers where you're going to have sort of senior people who will have the scaffolding. You could have people that won't have it, and that will be sort of a neglected skill. If you think about what businesses need to do with the efficiency mandate, but the need to innovate, are there any sort of closing thoughts that you would have there on how businesses best move forward?
And I'm going to bring it back to what you said about value creation, because that for me is the heart of the matter. Our need to create value has not changed. That's still there. That's why people buy from us as service providers, as consultants. Ultimately, most businesses sell to other people. So if people are going to buy from you, you've got to give them a reason to it, and specifically a reason to buy from you above anybody else. So if the bar has become raised because more people can now produce a reasonable answer, how do you get a good answer? I think it's fine to use AI and generative AI to get to a start point, and I think it's a good thing to do to train your teams in how to get there quickly, but we need to go beyond that. And I'll even expand it. I don't think it's just business. I think we need to think about it as humans, because how we learn and how we develop our critical thinking starts at a much earlier age. There's an old theory by Piaget around the stages of development, of learning and development. And it was thought then that the formal operation stage, the fourth stage, was when you start to critically think. But there's other theories now which say, actually, no, it starts a lot earlier than that. And that in children, we're starting to see that there's a value in education and a way to completely disrupt this industry by using AI to help them learn at the pace that suits them, to challenge them at a rate that they can learn, but not take them too fast so you don't lose them on the way. I think we're going to see a huge disruption in the education industry as people start to get personalized education plans. And I see no reason why business can't be the spearhead of that by saying, how can we train our teams in the way we want them to think based on our values and our principles and what good looks like based on our knowledge in our current team. But how do we use that to encourage the next generation to determine what good looks like now and in the future?
I like that in terms of how do you bring cultural values from a company into a more digestible way. But for now, we can touch on that next time. I think both of us are out of here next week for Eid, but then we'll be back here and we'll try to do this on the regular every couple weeks and just see where we get to.
That sounds great.
Cool. Thank you, man.